Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Politics and Prose. What an amazing crowd, and for good reason. So thank you all so much for coming out. I know it's been chilly out there, but reportedly it's now in the tropical 30s or something. So we're making progress anyway. I'm Lissa Muscatine. I'm one of the owners of Politics and Prose, and on behalf of my husband, who's also a co-owner of the store, and our great staff here, we welcome all of you to tonight's event. I just want to say quickly, because you are all a captive audience and I can't help myself, that we really are grateful to all of you who help this store continue not only to survive, but really to thrive. We wouldn't be here without a world of book lovers around us who so deeply believe in the role of independent bookstores, the role that we play in our community, and certainly in the intellectual and civic life that we all enjoy and share. And we know that you come in here because you value the sense of discovery that comes from browsing the shelves. You get to be in conversations with some pretty expert booksellers that you consult with. Perhaps you participate in our classes or trips or outings that we sponsor around the community and even around the country and even actually overseas. And obviously, I think many of you know that we have an extensive calendar of this kind of author event, about 475 a year in the store and dozens outside the store. And to put it quite simply, we are able to provide this kind of programming, much of it free, because you've chosen to make your book purchases here at Politics and Prose, and that you care about supporting a local independent bookstore. We don't take it for granted. We believe in providing these kinds of services because we believe in building community. And I thank you in advance for continuing to be such a loyal group of supporters for this store. It's why we're doing well and why we will be here as long as you guys are helping us stay here. So thank you for that. All right. I've done my editorial commentary, which is appropriate, right? I mean, we have a person who's done a lot of editorial commentary, or op-ed commentary to be precise. It's such a pleasure to have Anna Quindlen at Politics and Prose tonight for her new novel. It's her 7th, Still Life with Bread Crumbs. This book is the latest in what might be called, or what I'm taking the liberty of calling, the Quindlen canon. Writing that includes fiction, nonfiction, children's books, and of course, her wonderful columns in the New York Times and Newsweek. And I was actually thinking today, as I was pondering the really incredible body of work that is under her name, that if you line up the titles of her books and columns, so for example, Public and Private, Loud and Clear, Object Lessons, Rise and Shine, Black and Blue, Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake, A Short Guide to a Happy Life, you get a pretty good appreciation of what inspires her work and also what inspires such loyalty among her readers. I think all of us know, whether we prefer her columns or her fiction or her nonfiction or like all of them equally, that she really gives us a means of navigating all sorts of life journeys, the expected, the unexpected, the welcome or not. And I think that's because she brings to her work the narrative voice of a great novelist, the observational powers of a great journalist, and the courage and convictions of a great columnist. All of which I think explains why she has more than a few bestsellers under her belt, millions and millions of loyal followers and readers, and of course a Pulitzer Prize. Now, her new book, and I'm just going to pick it up for a second. When I first saw this, I just had to hold it. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. You can all see that. The cover is beautiful. The pages are just stunning and gorgeous. The type is gorgeous. It's a sumptuous experience just to hold it. No, you cannot do this with an e-reader. I'm sorry. Anyway, but I just want to assure you that as obviously kind of a sensory experience as I've just exhibited, that this is just as fine a work of literature as it is an aesthetic pleasure. And I hope you will enjoy it as much as I have and as much as the booksellers who've had a chance to read it in the store have already. I'm sure you will. Please join me in welcoming Anna Quindlen to Politics and Prose.
Thank you all. Well, I'm now going to ratify Lissa's comments. One of the best things about going on book tour is the opportunity to spend time in independent bookstores all over this country. And despite some of the conventional wisdom of recent years, my experience is that most of those bookstores, and they are some of the best places on earth, are really thriving at this point. I first went on book tour 25 years ago. I was pregnant with my daughter Maria, and the media escorts who take us around town each had the name and location of the nearest level 1 neonatal ICU, which was both soothing and terrifying. A lot has changed in those 25 years, as you all know. I remember opining very strongly at the time that reading digitally was never ever going to take off. But there are two truths there are two facts that have never changed. That people say all the time that reading and books are on the downswing, and that everything that I see around me indicates that that's absolutely false. Everywhere I go, there are book groups. Everywhere I go, there are people embracing really challenging and interesting works of fiction and nonfiction. And that makes me very happy, because there are few things on earth that I love as much as I love reading. I've often said that it's the ultimate democratic act of a democratic society, because where people read, the big lies of demagoguery cannot hold. But I also think in our society it does something as important, perhaps even more so, and that is that it helps us feel less alone. It helps us feel connected to ourselves and to people outside ourselves. It makes our world bigger and more expansive and more resonant. The funny thing is, it not only does that for readers, it does that for writers too. Most of the time, I'm one little woman in a room on the top floor of a house in New York City in front of a blank computer screen by herself. I'm surrounded by people, but they're all imaginary, which makes me a terrible dinner party guest. You know, somebody saying I performed surgery today, and somebody else is saying I took a deposition, and I'm saying, well, I got Rebecca into tea for two, and she ate 2 scones. And everybody goes, who's Rebecca, you know? But there's a connectedness in producing this work that's not dissimilar to the connectedness that I hope readers feel reading it. There's that sense of a conversation that I'm having with people I can't see. And another one of the great things about being on book tour is that you finally get to see them. So thank you all for coming here tonight. This is a novel about a woman who is 60 years old and who has run out of cash. Her name is Rebecca Winter, and she still is a famous photographer. She's particularly famous for one picture, a picture of what was left on her kitchen counter after she finished a dinner party that she entitled Still Life with Bread Crumbs. A picture that became a kind of a feminist icon on pictures, on postcards, in books, because of what apparently it said about the drudgery of domesticity. Rebecca meant none of that when she took the picture. It was just there in front of her. She's still well known for it. People still recognize the poster, except that being well known doesn't pay the rent. And she's gotten to the point where she's run out her string professionally. She's helping to take care of her parents. She's helping to shore up the life of her son, who is in his 20s. And she hasn't been producing work that she feels very strongly about for a while. So she sublets her apartment in New York City and moves to a ramshackle little cottage in the middle of nowhere, because it's infinitely cheaper to rent a ramshackle little cottage than it is to stay in your apartment in New York City. And she's looking for something to take pictures of, something that will save her, something to engage her, something to give her what someone said yesterday in one of those eureka moments we novelists have is a coming of age, really. Despite the fact that she's 60, we usually think of a coming of age novel as a young man, 18 to 22, getting his sea legs. But, you know, it can be a woman, 60, refinding her sea legs. At the very beginning of the book, Rebecca, who is not at all a country girl, has discovered that something is living in her attic crawl space. And the section that I'm going to read from the novel is when the roofer who has discovered it comes back to take out the animal that has been trapped and to begin to fix her roof. The roofer had returned at 8 a.m. She had already been up for hours. The roofer had looked as though he had too, but in a good way. Damp, fair hair like a cornfield with its comb tracks, T-shirt with a hint of fold marks and the smell of fabric softener, dark green windbreaker with the words Bates Roofing in gold embroidery. He must have a good wife, Rebecca had thought, picturing a woman folding his T-shirts, smoothing them with her hand, handing him the windbreaker from a hook in the hall. The rented house reeked of smells. Rebecca preferred not to parse them too closely, and from time to time there was a half-hearted clanking noise from above. She wondered if the raccoon would die of exertion. She hoped so. She had heard the staccato drumming of the truck engine climbing the hill, and she went out front where the air was fresh and lovely, grass and flowers and a suggestion of wet soil. Why did the forest out back smell of rot and the sunny front lawn like the signature scent of springtime? A glint of light crossed her face from below like some mysterious signal, and she raised her hand to shade her eyes, and the roofer raised his to return what he clearly thought was a greeting. "I don't even need to ask," the roofer had said when he got out of the truck, although she wasn't sure if he meant the circles under her eyes or the smell from the house. "How on earth will you get that creature out of the attic?" she said wearily. "First the coon, then the cage," he said, and from the passenger seat of the car he took a long gun. "You're going to shoot it? Unless you had another idea," he'd said. "When I saw the trap, I assumed you would release it." He held the gun by the barrel. It was carved with a hunting scene. A man and a deer, both stiff and unconvincing, but made beautiful by the gloss of the wood and the faint blur to the figures and the finish that Rebecca thought meant the gun was old and well used. Grandfather, father, son, a family gun. Here's the thing about raccoons. They're creatures of habit. If you catch a coon and spray paint an X on his butt, then let him go, a week later you'll be catching the same coon. The X on his butt will be laughing at you. So yeah, if you want, I can try to let him go, but unless I drive him to Maine, he'll be back and trying to find a way into your attic. You'll be starting all over again. Rebecca closed her eyes. "No, thank you," she said. "Good decision," he said, opening the flimsy screen door. "Sometimes I think city people wind up watching too many Disney films. They confuse real animals with cartoon animals." "Can I take a look first?" she asked. "At the coon?" "I'm a photographer," she said. "Be my guest." She'd climbed the ladder in the narrow hallway, thrust her head and shoulders through the hatch, and rested her elbows on the edge of the filthy attic floor. The cage was wedged into the corner over the kitchen, up against a pile of old screens and a cardboard box. The raccoon looked over its shoulder at her, its pinpoint eyes wild with fear and rage. It did look like a cartoon character, but a cartoon character in one of those avant-garde cartoons young artists were always making and Ben was always praising. Sven the Possessed Raccoon, it would be called. She thought she heard a hiss. An overhead bulb in the center of the triangular space cast deep shadows. The scent of waste and desperation was too much to take for long. She shot a few fast photographs as the coon hurtled toward her, clinging to the bars of the cage and somersaulting as though he could spin free. He stopped not far from the hatch, and she shot a few more of his pointed face in close-up. "He ate the banana," she said after she came down the ladder. I think that's a she, the roofer said. A male raccoon is pretty mellow. He'd probably be half asleep right now. A female raccoon will tear you to pieces if you give her half a chance. It was music to my ears to hear you laugh. Because my last novel, Every Last One, was a novel that I'm very proud of, but I went to a really, really dark place with that book. And so when I sat down to begin a new one and I was thinking about Rebecca, I thought of three things. The first was that for the first time in my career, I wanted to write a love story. The second was that I wanted to write a novel with a happy ending because of all of the readers who have said to me plaintively, does Fran Flynn ever get her son back? Or does Megan's son Leo ever walk again? So I wanted a happy ending, and I wanted to have kind of a good time. And someone said to me the other day in an interview, although this book is about loneliness and it's about need and it's about being impecunious, which is so scary, there's a playfulness to the book that you haven't had before. And that word was music to my ears. So I would love to take questions. I will repeat the question, although I had a really traumatizing experience with that once. On my first book tour 25 years ago, and big as life, pregnant, I was in a now gone independent bookstore in the People's Republic of Berkeley, California. Cody's. And I read from Object Lessons, and they said, the room is really crowded. Could you repeat the question? So I read from Object Lessons about this very tyrannical Irish Catholic patriarch. And I recognized a man who had a question. I said, yes. And he said, how can you justify your paper's shameful coverage of the Gulf War? So I repeated that, and then I tried to answer it. And then the next person said something like, I find your work overtly sexist and covertly imperialist. So I repeated that. And then I said, I can take one more question, and I'll be doing that here tonight, too. And as I was leaving, I turned, and a young man was sitting in the front. I think he was a Berkeley student, and he said, did you learn anything from this experience? And I said, yes, I now believe Patty Hearst's entire story. And no one laughed. And as I was walking out to the car, I was with the late, great media escort from San Francisco, Kathy Kamen Goldmark. And I said to Kathy, you have been to Cody so many times with so many people. Have they ever been that mean to one of your writers before? And she thought for a moment, and then she said, they were almost that mean to G. Gordon Liddy. So when you ask your questions, I ask only that you be at least as nice to me as you would be were I G. Gordon Liddy. Anyone? Can we use the mics? Come now, this is not middle school.
So I notice in your dedication in the new book is to teachers and your best teacher. I've worked in schools most of my career. And so I wonder where that dedication comes from deepest in you, and or where you see it reflected in Rebecca and the story that's told.
It's very simple. I'm a writer because of teachers. I wouldn't be standing here tonight if it wasn't for teachers. I mean, when you're a kid, there are two sets of very powerful people in your life. Your parents and your teachers. And if one of those people over and over again keeps saying to you, you're really good at this, keep doing this, I really like what you do here, this is smart, this is interesting, this is funny, you keep on doing it. So, I mean, it's really a direct line. I can't thank the teachers that I had and that my kids have had enough for what they've done out in the world. And the specific teacher who that's dedicated to is my younger sister, Teresa, who's head of the history department at a school in San Francisco in a really poor area. She's got kids, you know, of tremendous need. And because of my sister Teresa, if a person says to me, but they only work from 8 to 3 and they have the summers off, I will beat them with my bare hands.
Or stay in Atlanta overnight and have a sleepover with 300 kindergartners in a
Hey,
bus.
thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
A short guide to a happy life was a commencement speech, am I right?
It started life as a
Started out that
commencement
way.
speech.
Right. So I look at it as advice that you're giving graduates, young women maybe in particular. And then and it was some time ago, and then I read every last one, and I had a hard time putting those two philosophies together. And you said you went to a very dark place. So how did you marry the two perspectives, and would you give that same speech today?
Oh, I'd absolutely give that same
Good.
speech today.
I took your advice, and I'm not a recent graduate.
I'm very much, well, except here's the thing about commencement speeches. First of all, they're the only speeches I ever give where I'm not the point of the exercise. I mean, you guys are here tonight, I'm so happy to say, to see me. If I'm asked to give a speech someplace, people come to hear me. But at a commencement, I am a very collateral part of the whole deal. Most people are there to hear 2 words, first and last name of the person that they love, right? But so you have an audience not only of the graduates, but of the faculty who are behind you, judging you harshly. And all those family members, the parents, the grandparents. And one of the reasons why those speeches are uniquely challenging is that you do want to be trying to talk to the graduates, but you want to say something that generalizes to the entire audience. As for every last one, after the fact, some of my closest friends said to me, I can't believe how normal you were while you were working on that book. But, you know, writing a novel is like playing a role in a play. You know, you play Juliet and you die at the end, and then you take off your makeup and you go home and make dinner. You get to sort of strip it off. And that's what you do with a novel, too. At 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you stop being Mary Beth Latham or Rebecca Winter or Fran Flynn or all the rest of them, and you go back to being yourself. And it really is possible to sort of step in and out. If it hadn't been, I would have been a mess while I was working on that book because it was so dark and challenging.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi. So my friend Sarah called just before I came over, and she's in Vermont, and she would like you to know how thankful she is for the piece you wrote entitled Anniversary, and how she thought that it handled like no other the death of a parent. And perhaps you could share with us what went into that, writing that piece.
Well, I actually have spent some of the best years of my life writing about the precipitous ending of my mother's, who died when she was just past her 40th birthday, and I was 19. And I can't remember exactly what it was I wrote 2 or 3 years ago, and I said, I'm done. And I didn't say I'm done for me, because it's obviously a rich psychological vein of ore for me to mine. I said it for her. I sort of decided a couple of years ago that it was time to let my mother be a person and not iconographic. But recently my father died, and the new impulse I find is to even the balance. My father was an enormous cheerleader of mine. My 4 siblings all laugh about what they called the wall in his house, which is literally a wall of photographs of me in different settings. Me with Bill Clinton, me getting a Pulitzer, me. I mean, they're remarkably good humored about the fact that there literally was a whole wall of me. But also, he lived through all those years when my mother became Saint Prudence of the spaghetti and meatballs. And so I actually wrote my first, I wrote my first substantive piece about him, which is in Good Housekeeping this month, just to try to begin to even up the balance. But I mean, the motherless daughter thing is just huge, depending on when it happens to you. I tried to explore it a little bit in the novel One True Thing. And it's something that never leaves you, but, you know, it changes you. I mean, I do remember very, very well the day that we were in the kitchen and my mother said to me, well, now you'll have something to write about. And if she had been a different kind of person, I would have thought that she was giving me a jab, but she wasn't that person. She was just saying, you know, wow, this will be material. And she was right.
Thank you very much.
Tell your friend I said hi.
I will.
It's a pleasure to see you. I've been reading you for years, and I miss you in Newsweek.
We miss everyone in Newsweek.
Yeah, we do, don't we? Which is kind of the question. You know, the first novel of yours I read was Black and Blue, and it made a big impression on me just because it was really kind of powerful, and it was an issue I didn't know anything about at the time. Because you're an essayist also and a editorialist, do you get called on still to talk about that issue of domestic violence? And what prompted you to write a book like that?
Actually, I didn't know anything about domestic violence. I wasn't interested in writing about domestic violence. Thematically, I'm always 3 or 4 beats away from the issues in my books. I'm a Dickensian. Dickens is my favorite writer. I'm very, very much affected by what he brings to the work. And one of the things that you see with Dickens is these vast themes of fairness and parity. And then it becomes a narrower theme, which is about how crazy the justice system is. I'm talking about Bleak House, of course. So when I started working on Black and Blue, I wanted to write a novel about women's identity. And how my feeling was that, like layers of clothes, women wore their beloved others as though they were themselves. You know, I'm Quinn, Chris, and Maria's mom. I'm Jerry's wife. I'm Bob and Prue's daughter. I'm, you know, I'm Janet's best friend, all those kind of things. And what would life be like for a woman if she was stripped of all that? Now, in a picaresque novel, the 19th century picaresque novels, you know, she would throw it all up and take a raft down the Mississippi and change her name. But I don't believe that in the lives of women. I mean, it takes too long to find the right fabric for those curtains for you to just turn your back on those damn curtains. So I started to think about what would make a woman leave her entire beloved life behind. And over time, I thought the thing that would make you leave is if you had to protect your kid. And the thing that you might have to protect your kid from is his father. And that was how I eventually came around to that. But I knew nothing. I went back and checked because when I was on book tour, I'd been asked a number of times. I had never written a column about the subject. I didn't know anything about it. I made it all up. And some of my greatest satisfaction has been hearing people who know the subject down to the ground saying to me, boy, did you get the details right. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I wasn't quite ready to go yet next because I was trying to formulate my question in my head. My mother passed away when I was 18 after 3 years of cancer. I was going through the airport and I picked up lots of candles, plenty of cake, because I'd been reading interesting government documents like requests for proposals. And I thought, oh, this is great. And it also, in the front pages, you talk about a 23-year-old. My daughter's 23. She's in LA. She's waiting for you to get out there so she can talk to you. We read the book together, and she kept calling me and saying, Mom, this is you. Mom, this is you. The thing I struggled with was once she turned 18, she graduated from high school. I moved to D.C. to work. Her father stayed in New York or in North Dakota, and she is out in L.A. And she kept calling me and saying, Mom, what should I do about this? Mom, what should I do about this? And it dawned on me, I did not know how to parent beyond the age of 18 because I hadn't been parented beyond the age of 18. And I wondered if you had struggles in raising your children when they came back to you and asked you questions when you didn't have the opportunity to turn to your mother. I keep saying to her, ask your girlfriends.
Is your daughter an only child?
Yes.
One of the great advantages I've had as a parent is that I have 3 children, and I wouldn't say they parent one another, but they police, support, encourage, love, hang with one another. And I think particularly once they got past their teenage years, the web of the 3 was as sustaining for them as I was. But, my mother was really aces at unconditional love, and I just tried to keep that in mind all the time. I mean, the 5 kids, we all thought we were the favorite. And that was my goal. My goal was for the 3 of them someday to sit around and say, I'm the favorite. No, I'm the favorite. No, I'm the favorite. And that was what I tried to do. My challenge, I think, and the challenge of a lot of women of our generation is, through most of my life, I've been trying to be both the person my mother was and the person my father was at the same time. He was very hard charging and ambitious and very work centered, and that's like one person too many, and bringing those roles together and still doing a good job as a parent, I think, has been really challenging for me and for all of us.
Thank you.
Hi.
So your column in Newsweek a couple weeks after September 11th was a very humanizing column. It was the one about the 3-year-old sitting between her parents. And it was this breath of fresh air during a conversation of hate, really. Can you talk a little bit about that column?
Imagining the Hansons, yeah. I sort of felt like that column was so simple and easy is the wrong word, but straightforward, because that's how I apprehend the world. I mean, I didn't spend much time watching the towers burn and thinking about radical Islam or jihad. I just kept thinking, I'm on this plane, I'm with my 2-year-old, she's in her car seat. And how, you go to get on a plane and you're really stressed and maybe the baby's cranky and I just kept thinking of them. I just kept thinking of all those people on the plane, and especially them because they had the passenger list and it had the 2 parents and their ages, and then it had the little girl and then 2. And that just seems so incredibly resonant to me. That was one of those times, I stopped writing the Times column in 95. And I didn't write a column for 5 years until I went back to do the column every other week in Newsweek. And people would ask me all the time whether I missed it. And the fact was I didn't. There's a switch that you have to turn on to be a columnist, and it runs 24/7. And when you turn it off, it's not like you're halfway off. It's like you're a civilian again. And there's something incredibly liberating about that, about not watching the State of the Union address with a notebook on your lap, But when I went back, and then when the attacks of September 11th happened, I was never so glad in my life that I changed my mind, because if I hadn't had a platform during those weeks, I would have gone a little crazy, just because of how huge the event was, but also because it was my city, because it was our country, because it was really terrible, and yet we were really wonderful for a while in a way that we seem to have utterly forgotten, which makes me crazy. We weren't mean-spirited, and we weren't immediately divisive. Boy, I miss that. I think about that sometimes now, and it seems kind of like a pipe dream. But those columns meant a lot to me as a writer. I mean, people always think of this as a one-way street. I produce words and send them out to you, but it's really transactional. in that when you send those words out and then somebody turns around and says to you, wow, that really did it for me. It's circular in the best possible way. It makes you feel as though you're part of some grand conversation.
That column did it for me.
Thank you.
Actually, I just want to follow up on what you just said, that it's transactional for you. I think that, and I wasn't gonna. This isn't what I was planning to say, so give me a second. I think that your writing, especially I think your expository writing, your journalistic writing, is very much like that, because I think that, and people say this about you all the time, critics and stuff. Your voice is so relatable. I think for your readers, that's why I think that's why we're all here. I mean, you have this very, very unique voice that is so easy to relate to for people from all classes and races and ages and gender crossing and everything. I mean, you just have this very unique voice that, you sit down and you read it and you're like, yes, she gets it. And, and she just, it's just very, so I just wanted to say that. But I also wanted to say that Barnard misses you. For those of you who don't know, she was trustee at Barnard College for many years. And my daughter graduated, I think, the same year you left. 4 years ago?
Yeah,
or were you 3 years?
I never really leave. It's like Godfather 3. Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back.
Yeah, well, that's because you were just integral to the workings of the college and everything. And she wanted me to tell you that she says hi and that she will never forget you serving bacon to her at all the midnight breakfasts.
Good girl, because somebody came up to me the other night and they were like, you served me tater tots at midnight breakfast.
No.
I was like, no. I only
you were the
serve
bacon
at midnight
server.
breakfast. In fact, all the observant Jewish girls were like, hey, Miss Quindlen,
Right,
we never get
exactly.
to see you because you only serve bacon.
Well, my daughter's a non-observant Jewish girl who loves bacon, so bacon got them through those long study nights finals.
Tell her I said,
yeah.
thanks so much.
So, so now my question is, what were your two favorite books as a child? Because I'm a children's lit person. And then what were your two most influential books that were written by women as an adult? I know you're a Dickens freak. So.
Well, as a kid, I'm a huge fan of a series of books that most people have never read, but the group that have read them will all now make a noise. And they're called the Betsy Tacy books.
Of course, they're still in.
You're much more of a Betsy Tacy crowd than I usually get. They were written by a woman named Maud Hart Lovelace. They're highly autobiographical. In fact, I was at an event in Arizona, and a woman came up to me and said, hi, I really wanted to meet you. I'm Tacy's granddaughter. And I almost fell over. It was like meeting like the Pope or the current Pope, I mean. And those books were huge for me. First of all, because they start when Betsy and Tacy are in kindergarten, and then they go straight through to Betsy's wedding. And so the voice changes a little bit as you get older, but also because Betsy Ray, from the time she's a little girl, tells her family that she wants to be a writer. And her family never says to her, oh, don't be ridiculous, or girls can't be writers, or there's no money in writing or anything. Everybody is hugely supportive of her being a writer. And in fact, since we know that Betsy and Maud are the same person, that's indeed what she becomes. They're wonderful novels about friendship. There's a great one called Betsy in Spite of Herself, where Betsy adds an E to the end of her name, the way we all changed our names when we were like 14 or 15. And she tries not to giggle or laugh too loud because she's interested in some lame-o boy or something. But they're really, really good books. And then, I mean, there's probably not a girl alive, and certainly not a girl who became a writer, who wasn't hugely influenced by Little Women. I mean, just it's just such, the archetypes, the sisters, Jo's struggles to find herself. I mean, there's a coming of age book. And then there were also a number of biographies that were really powerful for me. I know way more than I have any right to about the Tudors, because I started when I was really young with Elizabeth I, because I was very interested in world domination. And, so there you go. Women, it would have to be, as an adult, it would have to be Middlemarch, which I revisit over and over again. The Rebecca Mead, yeah, it's really, really an interesting book about how books change us. And probably The House of Mirth, which is a book that I really, really love. I think Edith Wharton is an amazing novelist. So those would probably be the two by women.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. No, we lost this mic, so you're up.
In the whole idea of giving you feedback on things that you've written at various points in time, there's one phrase that has stuck with me from what you wrote when your sister-in-law died at the age of 40 or so.
The continuous presence of an absence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I changed it a little to feel better about it, and changed it to the continuing absence of a presence. But it's really helped. And I was in chemotherapy, in fact, in '94 when One True Thing came out. My mother had died of breast cancer, too. So I was doing the, this is how my mother must have felt because I had little kids and, just all of that. So the book was very powerful. That and your sister-in-law and everything sort of happening all at once. On the one hand, you deal with really hard situations. And on the other hand, I'd love to encourage you to do that even more, because you frame things in a way that allows the rest of us to sort of attach what we're feeling, but we don't know what we're feeling, onto something. And the continuing presence of an absence has been very important and a gift, I think, for the people that really feel it.
Well,
So
thank you. I tried to do some of that in Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake with the chapter about mortality, which is near the end of the book, to try to revisit some of those issues. And also with the chapter on faith, because I think people feel challenged, and often so challenged that they don't do it in the first place, about writing about religion and the practice of religion. But I really appreciate that.
As you get older, and when you're writing in your 80s, we would it would be wonderful to see how your perspective has changed or hasn't changed on those topics.
Well, thank you.
So thank you.
And thank you for the faith of me writing in my 80s. Anyone else? Lissa? Oh.
I'm pretty loud. I don't know if I need them.
Yeah, but the people who are taping want to pick you up.
Oh, right. So we focused a lot on loss, and you do that brilliantly. But I just wanted to say, I give this book at every baby shower because you're the only sane voice in parenting. I mean, everybody else is blogging about everything. She just did a segment in Real Simple, a little blurb in Real Simple, that talked about balance, and it was realistic. And I have a 4-year-old little boy and a 6-year-old little boy, and I keep thumbing through this because I want to see what happens next. And now your boys are in their 20s, so it turns out well, right?
Well, actually, the oldest one is 30.
30, there we go.
So the little boys grew up, and I must say I was very nervous about those columns because I kept thinking someday they would grow up and read them and say, how dare she? But they're writers too, so it turns out they don't mind, especially now that they have custody of their own stories. Jennifer Senior has a really interesting book about how we've turned parenting into the Stations of the Cross.
Oh, good.
And here's the thing, I mean, why would you not want this to be fun? And why do women sometimes do this thing where they make it the station. I mean, look, I have 3 children. I had 3 children so I would never have to play board games. Okay?
Candyland.
You want to play
especially.
Clue? Go find Christopher. You know? I just felt like if it wasn't going to be fun, I was going to be really bad at it, you know? And it wasn't always fun, and I was really crazy part of the time. And the standing joke is that if I wrote a book about being a mom, it would be called Mistakes Were Made. But like most of it was a lot of fun. And I think sometimes when we're really worried about, you know, standardized testing and all that stuff seems so silly to me now. You know, I mean,
That's good.
you know,
'Cause we're meeting with the reading specialist.
See, my sons are
love books as much as I do.
my sons are men, and I look at them and think, did I really obsess about getting you out of diapers? I mean, did I really think that somehow that wasn't going to happen unless I like was magically vigilant? It's totally nuts. I mean, you just ought to try to have as much fun as you possibly can.
And make fun of the whole working mom juggle. Like what she said in her column that was so incredible. Well, you would say it better about what your definition of balance was.
Oh, well, when I said when the kids were little, you know, I was trying to write 2 columns a week and, you know, hang out with the kids and work on a novel. And I had 2 standards. No one was bleeding, and my sentences had verbs. That was like that was kind of the best I could do. But didn't I also tell that story? I mean, it's like the iconographic story about what my life was like. So I'm cooking dinner in the kitchen while I'm writing an op-ed page column for the Times, and Christopher comes downstairs and he goes, "Some man just called on your office phone, but I told him you couldn't talk because you were making dinner." Just like that. And it was Jesse Jackson. He called back the next day, and he was incredibly cool about having been dissed by an 8-year-old boy. But, you know, still, I just thought, you know, this is nuts. But, you know, at the end of the day, if I had it to do over again, I'd get rid of all the crazy stuff I obsessed about and just make more of the fun stuff. And at the end of the day, as I said in one column, I wound up with the 3 most interesting people that I'd rather be with than anybody else in the world. So, you know, and you know how that happened? It wasn't me. Right. The raw material was really good. They told me when to back off. They made this close little society of their own. And, you know, here we are.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Lissa, did you have one?
No, go ahead. Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. So I'm on the other end of things. My children are older. My son's almost 18. My daughter's 20. And I've been reading you since you did Life in the 30s and wrote about those little kid moments that were so inspiring. I would love some of your thoughts about having adult children and parenting adult children, because it's a whole different perspective.
I'm trying to think of whether I actually parent my kids anymore. I mean, I certainly give them a lot of advice. I spend a lot of time talking to them. My eldest son and I work in the house together and meet for lunch most days and talk about everything under the sun. They're writers, so we talk about writing a lot. My daughter and I just went out and spent the day together. But I don't really think of it as parenting anymore. Because I think if you're doing it right, the onus is on them. I don't offer unsolicited advice. I don't tell them what to do. I don't try to steer them anymore. They're grown people. They have really good compasses, both moral and intellectual. And I'm just always really grateful when they think that my perspective on a variety of things might help them to move themselves along. But I mean, it's not that friendship thing, because I do think there's always that distinction between your parents and your friends. But it's a kind of we have a peer relationship now at a certain level. We have a professional peer relationship. We have certainly have an intellectual peer relationship, except I'm a little behind them, and it's just much more transactional. I think you're always playing out rope. It's like fishing. You're playing out the line, and then at a certain point you look down and you go like this, and the line's off the reel. And that's what it's like when they're grown-ups, and they're just swimming, and you just try to keep up as best you can. It's nothing but good, nothing but good.
I agree with you about having older kids. It's nothing better. I want to ask you about your roller coaster with the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
I've always really related to you with these feelings. And speaking of the Pope, I'm just wondering where you are now with that.
Well, I stopped attending Mass some years ago because I felt like every time I showed up in the pews, I was ratifying a hierarchy that I not only didn't believe in, but often felt repelled by. But I find myself in a very odd situation nowadays. I feel a little bit like a woman who has had a series of bad romantic relationships, and so at a certain point has said, I'm done with men, and then one day a guy walks in. And he's little and bald, and he doesn't wear red or all the jewelry. I mean, this Pope is, I think, making people who didn't dare to hope again. And I don't know how much of it is real. There was an excellent piece in the New Yorker by James Carroll talking about him in light of John the 23rd, in which he asked someone, isn't this just style, not substance? And the responder said, in the papacy, style is substance. Uh-huh. And I think Francis is making that really writ large in terms of his behavior. So I'm watching and waiting to see whether someone is trying to steer the Catholic Church back towards the New Testament, because it seems to have gone pretty far afield from it. I mean, look, I am and will always be Catholic.
That was going to be my question.
I mean, look, it's
I'm
deep in you. I'm a liberal because I'm a Catholic.
Yeah.
I'm a liberal
Social
because
justice.
exactly that you
can't get
you feel called to the doctrine of individual conscience.
Yeah.
That's not about going to Mass. That's about a way of seeing the world.
And that's not the church.
Well, it should be the church, but it's not the
not
church. And what Francis makes you hope, when you think of social justice, when you think about the fact that government has an affirmative obligation to afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, you hope that that's the guy he's going to be, and early indications are that he steers the ship in that direction. But you worry, in the immortal words of the Who, we won't get fooled again.
Well, I find it hard to explain to people, so I'm looking to you to help me give this. How you can't really leave it behind, but you have to be critical and
you can't
and realistic.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions from yonder? Somebody packed in the middle who can't bear the thought of getting up. Yes.
I correspond with you on Facebook and really enjoy the things that you put out. And I was wondering if that is another kind of release for writing that you appreciate, or where that is for you in terms of an obligation or pleasure or what.
My publisher insisted on starting something called a Facebook fan page. I fought them with everything that was in me, but I lost. I kept saying to them, I am to writing what a prostitute is to sex. I only do it for money. But they didn't. They weren't open to that. So I post, as you know, maybe every 2 weeks or something. But the feedback is really nice. It's really nice when you put something out there and, 40,000 nice people say, hey, good job. So it's less onerous than I expected it to be. Having said that, I have really a fear of social media. On Tuesday, for pub date of the book, I took over the Random House Twitter feed for the day. And the person who handles that at Random House has been trying to get me to become at Anna Quindlen ever since I took it over for the first day of Lots of Candles, Plenty of Cake. And when I signed off that night, I said something, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I once had a very bad Tetris problem. So bad that I had to delete the program from my computer. It started out, I'll play one game before I start to write, and then eventually became, I'll play until I get to 20,000 points, and then I'll start to write. And I can see Twitter going the same way. It's just, plus you become aphoristic in your life. I was talking to my daughter, and I was talking to her in little sound bites. So Twitter I am not going to do, but every 2 weeks or so I write something on the Facebook fan page. So anyhow, I'm happy to sign until the last dog dies. Thank you all so much for coming.